All right. So welcome everyone as you're logging on tonight. We're so glad to have you on a blustery Tuesday night. Wow. It's so funny, Wendy. We're we act like, this is storm of the century because we get some raindrops, huh? And it's like, oh, I don't know, can I go out? Maybe I better bunker down because it's raining.
True story.
I think everyone else in the country must giggle at us, Californians.
Oh, I think so. I think so.
Oh. All right, everyone. Well, welcome to tonight's webinar on Section 504s. I'm so grateful to have our guest, Wendy Carcevar, the district's 504 coordinator. She is knowledgeable and parent-friendly, and we are so happy to have her. I want to let you know that we are in webinar mode. So what that means is you can see us, we can't see you. So feel free to be comfortable and enjoy your snacks and you'll be fine. A couple housekeeping moments is if you need, what am I going to say? Oh, if you need captions, you can enable that over on the bottom of your screen. Another feature I'd like to point out is on the bottom, you'll see Q&A. That's the question and answer feature. If you would please use that to ask direct questions about the presentation. On next to that, you'll see the chat feature. Why don't you go ahead and introduce yourselves in that? We can use that if you want to communicate with each other, say hello. But if you have a direct question for myself or for Wendy, please put that in the Q&A box because that helps me keep track of it. So we make sure that your questions get answered. Lastly, you will get an email from me within a day or two, hopefully tomorrow. It will include the links to all the handouts from tonight, your certificate of attendance, the link to the recording of this webinar. So don't fret and feel like you have to memorize it all. You're going to get an email from me. In just a moment, though, when Wendy gets started, I'm going to put in the chat and we're going the link to the drive, the Google Drive that has all the handouts. So if you have, if you want to follow along, some people like to do that. It's in the drive. Okay. So with that, I'll go ahead and turn it over to Wendy and let her get started. Thank you.
Thank you, Leanne. And then as questions come up and you feel that like there's an opportunity to break in, you're gonna let me know, right?
I am, yes. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Well, thank you. We really appreciate you joining us tonight. I'm always happy to talk about Section 504 because it's all I do all day long, every day. And I think there's a lot of misunderstanding kind of out in the world about what 504 actually means, what it is, and what it isn't. So I'm happy to have you here tonight and be able to talk to you about this a little bit. I love this little graphic of the little schoolhouse. Section 504 means equal opportunity, but it doesn't necessarily mean equal outcome. And I will explain that a little bit later as I get into the kind of deeper into the definition of what it does and what it doesn't do. But I want to start very basic. What is a 504 plan? A 504 plan is an accommodation plan that is designed to level the playing field for a student with a qualifying disability. And by level the playing field, who are we leveling the playing field to? We're leveling the playing field to all the students that don't have that particular child's disability. So we're trying to make sure that we provide appropriate accommodations for a student who has qualified with a qualifying disability. And again, I will get deeper into what disability actually means in terms of under the Section 504 law. Okay, so this is the very legal language about it. A 504 plan is a plan designed to accommodate the unique needs of an individual with a disability as required by the Americans with Disabilities Act, or the ADA. The actual formal name for 504 is Section 504 of the Rehabilitation Act of 1973. So this law goes back 50 years, and it was amended in 2009. So there was a little bit of a change to it. What happened in 2009? Well, I'll tell you what happened in 1973 when the 504 law actually became a law. We had about 40 years of really an exclusive recognition of it. Okay. And what I mean by that is it was pretty hard for a child or a student or a human being to qualify for a 504 plan. So those of you that are my age or Leanne's age, you probably don't remember a whole lot of kids at your school that had a 504 plan. In fact, I cannot remember one person, and I went to school in the 70s and 80s. I know I'm dating myself, but I don't remember any kids. I do remember some kiddos that were classmates of mine that had ADD. I do remember that, but I don't remember ever hearing about a 504 plan. So the reason for that is because it was really hard to get. And in 2008, the United States Congress got back together about it and said, you know what, we've been interpreting this wrong all along. So we need to sort of change the definitions a little bit. And that is why we see more students that qualify today because of that amendments that happened in 2009. So children who have disabilities, but whose disabilities do not interfere, this is very important, with their ability to progress in general education are not eligible for special education services, but they may be entitled to a 504 accommodation plan. So when we talk about an IEP, which a student gets in special education under the IDEA law, they qualify under 13 very specific categories of eligibility. Okay. Well, there are students who maybe they have ADHD, or maybe they have diabetes, or maybe they have something, they have some kind of a what would be considered legally a disability, but they don't qualify for special education because their disability doesn't prohibit their ability to progress in general education. Okay, so they don't qualify under any of those 13 categories of eligibility for special ed, but they may qualify for a 504 accommodation plan. And that's what we'll talk about a little bit later too, is what's the difference between an IEP and a 504 plan. The other thing that's important to know is that Section 504 of the Rehabilitation Act protects students with disabilities from discrimination and entitles them to regular or special education and related aids and services. Now, what do I mean by that? So what I mean, why I'm talking about special education there is that I think it's important, and a lot of people don't know this. All students who have an IEP, they are also protected under Section 504. Okay, so the IEP for those students is it's the academic plan right? It's the Individualized Educational Plan, but they're protected under Section 504 as well, which means that they cannot be discriminated against on the basis of their disability. Okay, so it doesn't work in the reverse. All right, Section 504 students, if a child qualifies for a 504 plan, they're not also an IEP student. Okay, but it works the other way around. All IEP students are protected under Section 504. We don't do, like, they don't have an additional 504 plan. Everything goes into their IEP, but they are protected under that law. So to qualify for a 504 plan, we call it a three-prong analysis for eligibility determinations. The student must have a physical or mental impairment. It must substantially limit or have a substantial limitation or a major impact on a major life activity. Okay, so the reason why I share that with you is because sometimes we have students that maybe have, I always kind of default to ADHD because that's what we see the most of. But we might have a student that has ADHD, but we don't see a substantial limitation. They're functioning beautifully at school. They're getting good grades. They're well adjusted. They're healthy. We look at a whole lot of different things to see, is there a substantial limitation? So, you might possibly know somebody or have someone in your family or in your life that has ADHD, but you also are aware that they don't necessarily have a 504 plan. So they might not need one. Okay. But
So
that is,
Wendy,
yes, go ahead.
oh, sorry, let me jump in real quick. So what you're saying is it's not the actual diagnosis that drives the eligibility.
Correct.
Okay, and a question we have right this minute is dyslexia a qualifying disability for a 504?
It could be. Absolutely. Yeah, it might be.
Thank you.
But you brought up an interesting point, though, about a diagnosis. So just because, and I think I have this in the PowerPoint later, but it's timely and it's relevant. Just because a student has a diagnosis, that doesn't mean they automatically qualify for a 504 plan. And also, if a student doesn't have a diagnosis, they may still qualify. So a diagnosis, it's information for our 504 team to consider, but they may or may not have a diagnosis, and that doesn't mean they won't qualify for a 504 plan.
And parents, I know this feels as clear as mud right now, but hang tight, okay? Honestly, Wendy will help clarify this. It is a little hard at first to hear the process, but it'll get clearer.
Yeah, it is a lot, and we understand that. So the student must have a disability or a suspected disability. So even if so as an example of that, okay, well, let me just finish this slide and then I'll kind of give you an example. The student is not required to have a formal medical diagnosis, but the site may ask somewhere in the process if there is a diagnosis as a matter of information and data to consider in a possible evaluation. So let's say you have a child who is a third grader and you have never had them formally assessed at either their pediatrician or one of the educational clinics we have in town. We have specialists. We have, there are a number of places where you can take your child to get assessed because maybe you suspect that they have ADHD. Okay. So, but let's just say you haven't done that, but you have your suspicions. You can go to the school site and let the school site know what you're seeing at home. Okay, some of the concerns that you have. So that's where we get into the area of a suspected disability. We don't know. We don't know if the third grade child has, or whatever grade, We don't know if there is, there's no formal diagnosis. We don't know if they have ADHD or, dyslexia that came up. We don't know. But you can request an evaluation or a special ed assessment. And a lot of times a parent will go to the school site and say, I don't know what I want, but I have some concerns. And that's kind of where you start. You start, especially if they're in elementary school, you're going to start probably with the teacher and just, start asking questions. And if you suspect a disability, that's the best place to start. And they have a team that will gather together, and they may, and again, I'm going to talk about this later in my in my PowerPoint, but they may gather a student study team together to, let's talk about what we're seeing. Let's talk with the teacher. Let's talk with the parents. Let's do so. My whole point here is we can have a diagnosis, but we don't have to have a diagnosis, a formal medical diagnosis. Now, that is a little bit different for medical situations. So if you suspect your child has diabetes or celiac disease or whatever, you're going to be in close contact with their pediatrician. So, and that's a little bit of a different process. But in terms of things like ADHD, things like that, we don't necessarily need a diagnosis. Okay. So as a parent of a child who may have a disability, what is my first step? Well, like I just mentioned a little bit ago, connect with someone at the school. It might be your child's teacher. If they're a little bit older in middle school or high school, it could be their guidance counselor, school nurse, school psychologist, somebody at the school. But the best first contact is typically going to be their teacher if they're in elementary, or their guidance counselor if they're in secondary. Okay.
Wendy, real
Yes.
quick before you start on the who determines eligibility, how formal does that process have to be? Like, for instance, is it enough just to mention it to a teacher, or do you feel like if you do that and you don't really get a response, could you follow up with someone?
Absolutely. That's a very good question. And you should connect with your child's teacher or guidance counselor. And you can do that verbally, but it's also best to follow up with an email. Okay, so that you have a paper trail. And if you don't hear, whoopsie, sorry. If you don't hear back from them or you don't get a response, then I definitely would follow up again. So yeah.
Thank you.
Yeah. And I know that like for an IEP assessment, it has to be in writing. The request has to be made in writing. So for 504, it's typically, it could be verbally or it could be in an email or however it's done. But ultimately, again, like I said, most of the school sites, not all, but most of them are going to want to say, let's start with a student study team meeting and gather some information before we, so it's a starting place. It's a great launching pad.
Okay. Do you want me to chime in with these couple questions we have?
Yeah, absolutely. Okay. Yeah.
So one is, do you have to provide the school with all of your child's diagnoses?
Do you have to provide the school with all of your child's diagnoses?
I would think if you want them considered, right?
Yeah, I mean, but not necessarily. Like if, yes, what you said is right. If you want them considered for eligibility, then we do need to know about them. But if, if your kiddo has a lot going on,
or maybe something, because how I read this is maybe something they want to keep confidential. Maybe they don't
sure.
feel like it impacts their education. And,
Absolutely.
that's how maybe I'm reading it
Yes.
as, do I
Yes.
have to let the school know? Okay.
Right. There
And
might be something that you feel is not relevant to school,
mhm,
and we would not need to know that. But if it's something you want considered for eligibility, then we do need to know. So
sure.
you're right.
What about here? I'm going to skip down to this one real quick. Is it possible for a student to have both an IEP and a 504 at the same time? Example, an IEP to receive speech services and 504 for severe food allergies.
Okay, so that's a very good question, and we don't typically do two plans. So
Mhm.
what we would do, and that is a really great example, and it's a good it it's a good question. And what I will say is what we usually do is the the 504 the 504 eligibility and accommodations for those food allergies can go into that IEP.
Right.
Now, because we don't case manage two different plans, right?
Mhm.
And especially if the child has an IEP, that IEP subsumes the 504. But
Mhm.
what's important to know is that a lot of times students have speech, they receive speech services in an IEP, and they eventually outgrow that, and where they no longer qualify for the IEP, then we just roll back into the 504 for the food allergies. Like the IEP goes away because they've outgrown it, and then we go back to having a 504 plan. That's a good question.
That is, and it's important to think of, like you said, the IEP is more stringent, for lack of a better word right now. But and so that can encompass those
Yeah.
safety issues that, that severe food allergy would bring up.
Yes.
Um, are there any timelines the school must respond in?
So yes, we actually follow the IEP timeline in Clovis Unified. Um, so typically, once a request is made, once a formal referral, um, the request for 504, so it's a little bit blurry. Okay, the lines are a little bit fuzzy.
Mhm.
Um, if if you receive a notice back from the site team that says we want to start with an SST meeting or a student study team meeting, then the timelines are kind of on hold. But if in that student study team, the team determines, you know what, we need to go forward with a 504, then yes, we call it a 15 plus a 60-day timeline, very much like the IEP, once that evaluation process starts.
Great, thank you. We've got one other question, but I think we can wait on that one. On
Okay.
Kathleen, we're going to wait a little bit and let's go ahead and move on, okay?
Okay.
Thank
So
you.
the school sites, who determines eligibility for a 504, and that is going to be the school site 504 team. They will review the requests for 504 evaluations. They will complete the evaluation and determine 504 eligibility. So the people who don't determine 504 eligibility are physicians, outside psychologists, counselors, private therapists. Um, they they're not a part of our team. We do, however, appreciate their information and input. So, but we get a lot of referrals from doctors that say this student needs a 504 plan. That doesn't automatically guarantee a 504 plan. Okay, so our team does the evaluation and determines who qualifies.
They'll
Schools,
take that information into consideration, right?
absolutely,
But it is
absolutely.
so confusing for families often. I know I struggled
Sure.
with it years ago too, to understand the difference between that medical model and the educational model. And
Right.
then you throw in there the regional center model. We had all kinds of models, and everybody has their own
Right.
criteria. And
Yes,
yeah, so they,
the doctors are operating under their medical law and medical model. We operate under educational law and our educational model, just like you just said.
yeah.
Schools, and I'm just sharing this because it's part of the legal stuff within Section 504. Schools are not required to accept outside evaluations of a child to determine 504 eligibility. The school site's 504 team has the right to conduct their own evaluation and determine eligibility. But while I'm saying that, I want to make very clear that we do appreciate, like, evaluations that come in if you've had your child formally evaluated by a clinic or their pediatrician. We really appreciate having that information. We consider all of it in our evaluation. So, but you may have been at another school in another district where the school site said, no, we don't want that evaluation. We're just going to do our own. And I'm saying that we do want anything that has been done to gather information about your child. We do take all of it into consideration. We're still going to do our own evaluation, but we do appreciate having the additional information about your child. So 504 is a team decision. And once a referral has been made, then it can go one of two ways. Either number one, yes, the 504 team will complete the 504 evaluation, complete and send home a notice of Section 504 evaluation. In SPED language, you may have heard that referred to as an assessment plan. Okay, we call it notice of 504 evaluation. Or what could happen is that the team may look at that request and say, you know what, we're really not seeing an impact on the student and their ability to access their education. We don't feel it's appropriate to evaluate at this time. If that happens, the other piece that I like for families to know is that even if the team declines to evaluate, your child is on their radar. And also at any time, like in the future, let's say let's say your kiddo is in the third grade and they're rocking the third grade, and there's something going on with your kiddo, but they're still accessing their education. They're showing great success. They're showing great growth. You still have your concerns. The team declined to evaluate. You can still come back in the fourth grade and say, can we look at an evaluation now? You can always request it again in the future. But also I want you to know that that student is on our radar, and we're going to be watching closely since you brought up your concerns. And then, sometimes we do see a student that in first grade, second grade, third grade, fourth grade, they are very successful. And then all of a sudden they hit kind of a growth spurt in the fifth grade. And maybe, things change with their hormones or whatever. And they kind of slip off the banana peel at school a little bit, and the alarm bells go off, right? And so then everybody comes back together and says, okay, I think this might be the time. Maybe we need to move forward. We need to look at what's going on with this student. Okay, so as I mentioned before, let's see, I think I skipped a slide. As I mentioned before, the site team may refer the student to the student study team process prior to a possible referral for Section 504. And don't be alarmed by that. That's really actually a great place to start to gather information and go, okay, which direction do we need to move in with this kiddo? And sometimes, a lot of times, the direction is we need to move forward into a 504 evaluation. Sometimes it's even a step further. We actually need to look at a special ed assessment. So but a student study team is a great place to start if your site team mentions that to you. As you know, you come in, you make a request, and they say, okay, we're going to start with a student study team meeting. Don't be alarmed or disappointed in that. It's really it's a solid process. Okay, so who is on the 504 team? Well, it's the legal definition is anybody that has knowledge about this child. So we consider as 504 team members the site 504 coordinator, their teachers, the parents and or their advocates, the student, depending on the age of the student. I always feel like it's appropriate by the time they get to 6th or 7th grade, and you know your student best, right? Primary age, younger elementary school, it's probably not appropriate for them to participate in the 504 meeting. But you know, by the time they're in high school, we are seeing the students show up to the 504 meetings and actually have a voice. The school psychologist, the school nurse, it could be one or both of those individuals, and other designated qualified staff. So usually, if they're in secondary, their counselor, their guidance counselor will be a part of the 504 team. So it's a 504 team decision to complete the 504 evaluation or deny the request. Both require written notice to the parent and a copy of the parent rights. Okay. And I don't know if any of you have ever participated in the special ed process. The parent rights are referred to as procedural safeguards, and they are many pages. We call ours the parent rights, and it is a one-pager. So, and if you do become a 504 parent and you're not already, then you will get a copy of that every time you meet with the 504 team. Copy of the parent rights.
You know, Wendy, speaking of parent rights, this would be a great time to ask a couple of these questions.
Okay.
For a kiddo that is in the ATP program, and for parents don't know what that means, that's the Adult Transition Program. So that's a student who has an IEP and didn't graduate, and so they're in the Adult Transition Program. It's a very specific program. So they want to know, is it too late to do a Section 504 by the time they're in at that point?
So yes, they wouldn't require a 504 plan if they're in ATP.
Because their IEP is still in effect through
Right.
22,
Right.
which is different than other students. Mm-hmm.
Yeah. So what we have seen though are students who either were in special ed and they were on the voc track in high school, and they ended up at adult school, and they end up going, like, we've had a handful of these students that they were voc track or they didn't graduate from high school, but they decided they wanted to go back to adult school to get their diploma.
Mm-hmm.
And we can't, if they had if they were with us in Clovis Unified and they had an IEP, then we will create a 504 plan for them to have at the adult school. And I can tell you, yeah, I've seen at least 3 or 4 students actually graduate with a diploma from the adult school, and they ended up getting a 504 because we knew they had qualified for the IEP.
Got it. Okay, one other quick question. I'm trying not to do too many, so if I haven't answered your question, don't fret. We're gonna get to them, okay? But does the parent or guardian have to approve the 504 plan, similar to how a parent guardian has to sign off on an IEP?
That is a very good question, and the answer is no. So the most important consent that we get from a parent under Section 504 is the consent to evaluate. So that's a great question, because that is one of the things that is a little bit different from an IEP. So no, we do not need a parent to affirm or sign off on a final plan once they have consented to us evaluating. We do get signatures, but the signatures in a 504 meeting are to acknowledge that the parent attended the meeting and participated in the process. Does that make sense? Okay.
Yes, thank you.
Okay, so once again, medical diagnosis itself is not sufficient to constitute an evaluation or to qualify a student. Well, why not? So there are many things that the team considers as part of assessment or evaluation. So we consider input from teachers on current performance. We consider input from the parents and the student, district and state testing results, social and cultural background, adaptive behavior, cumulative school records, health records, psychological assessments, other available reports and records. We look at the whole gamut to look and see if, so it's not just about grades. And that's really important to note about Section 504, is that grades do not drive eligibility. So it's about equal access. It's not about if a student is, getting good grades. Grades are a thing we look at. When we're looking at a snapshot of a student to see how they're doing in school, of course we look at their grades. But the grades alone, because sometimes, we'll have a student qualify for a 504 plan, and then their grades don't necessarily improve. Okay. And that is a thing that we look at, but I've had conversations with parents and they say, but I got a 504 plan for my kid and his grades haven't gone up. Well, the 504 doesn't promise that. It promises equal access. It promises that we're going to work to level the playing field, but it doesn't promise grades. So, but there's a whole lot of things that we consider when we're looking at eligibility for 504. So according to the law, which is the Rehabilitation Act of 1973, a person is considered to have a disability if that person has a physical or mental impairment that substantially limits one or more major life activities. And I know you've already heard me say this tonight. Or if they have a record of such an impairment, or if they are regarded as having such an impairment. That's the legalese. But like I already mentioned, if they have a disability or we suspect that they have a disability, that's where we're looking to qualify. Okay, so once again, some more legal language, and I know it's so dry and it's hard to fun it up. But under the 504 law, substantially handicapping condition means that an individual is unable to perform a major life activity that the average person in the general population can perform, or they are significantly restricted as to the condition, manner, or duration for which an individual can perform a major life activity as compared to the average person in the general population. Okay, so we're, if a student, I'm trying to think of a good example. So let's just go with our friend ADHD again. And a student has a hard time sitting at a desk and really focusing for an extended period of time. And they look around the classroom and their peers that don't have ADHD don't have that same hard time. That's the comparison that we're making. So the average person that doesn't have that particular disability as compared to the person who does have that disability, how can we level the playing field for that kiddo? Okay. A person has a substantial limitation when one or more important life activities are restricted as to the conditions, manner, or duration under which they can be performed in comparison to most people. So it might not be to all people, but most people. Like if you look at a classroom of students and there's 28 kiddos in there, and one kiddo has ADHD and the other 27 do not, okay, what are the things that that one child that has ADHD, where's the struggle? So how do we compare that? And it's, that's where we figure out what kinds of accommodations we can create to implement to level the playing field for that little student. So major life activities, because that's now our language, major life activities. What are some examples? And this is not an exhaustive list, but these are just some examples. So caring for oneself, performing manual tasks, walking, seeing, hearing, eating, sleeping, standing, lifting, bending, speaking, breathing, learning, reading, concentrating, thinking, communicating, working, and other. I mean, it's, again, like I said, not an exhaustive list. One thing I do want to say is that prior to that amendment of 2009, this list included like learning, reading, concentrating, and thinking. Okay, it had maybe four things on it. So that's how the law changed it. It just includes a much more broad sampling of what constitutes a major life activity. Okay. Do any disabilities guarantee 504 eligibility? No. Okay. There is, according to OCR, which is the Office for Civil Rights, there is no disability, disorder, condition, or impairment that would automatically make an individual eligible under Section 504. So, in other words, just because a child's been diagnosed with ADHD, that doesn't mean it's a guarantee. Okay. That's why we have to do our evaluation process. Okay.
All right, we're hanging in there with you, Wendy.
Do we have some questions?
We do, but I feel like they can wait a little bit
Okay.
longer because they're going to get us down a rabbit hole. So let's keep going and we'll come back.
I got it. Okay.
Thank you.
So once again, it's a team decision. So and parents, you are a really important part of the team. Okay. And I know sometimes it's hard. I know it's hard when you come into a meeting and there's 6 or 7 or 8 people from the school and you feel like you're all by yourself, like you against the school. And we don't ever want you to feel that way. We really don't. We consider that you are part of the team, an important part of the team, because you know your child best. Okay. So after completing the 504 evaluation, it's a team decision whether the student meets eligibility under Section 504 requirements. The safety is within the team. No single person should be making these decisions. Now, having said that, I will say that our team, our site team, our psychologist or nurse or whatever, the educators on our 504 team, they're going to offer their professional opinion. Like they feel that, yes, they lean towards, yes, we do think this child is going to qualify because of what we saw in the evaluation. We did observations, we did interviews, we looked at all the data. But a student is not substantially limited simply because there is a perception that the student is not reaching his or her potential. Okay, that's something that's really important to note, because I hear this from parents a lot. My child is really, really smart, but they're not reaching their potential. That's not a qualifying factor, right? Potential, we can't, we have a lot of kiddos right now that are really struggling with motivation. Motivation is really, really hard to accommodate, right? I can create a beautiful 504 plan for a child that has ADHD and provide all these accommodations to help with the attention and focus, the impulsivity, all those things. Motivation is hard. And believe me, I mean, we get it. We know that a lot of parents are struggling with their kiddos' motivation, and we see it at school. but that's not necessarily a factor in section 504. Okay. This is really, really important. And a lot of times, I think most people don't know this until it comes up. Parents cannot choose between an IEP and a 504 plan. Okay. There is no like, they can't, like, if, how do I want to explain this? So let's say you have your child assessed at school for special education services. Okay. And the site IEP team decides that, yes, your child is going to qualify for an IEP, and that's the offer that the school is going to make, right? So they're offering an IEP. The parents cannot say, you know what, we've changed our mind. We don't want an IEP. We'd rather have a 504 plan. Okay. So we can't, there is no flexibility there. And I want to make sure that I make that clear, because sometimes there is confusion around that. So you can't go to the school and say, we've decided we would rather have the 504 plan instead of the IEP, because once we've decided, once our team has determined that your child qualifies for an IEP, we cannot offer a less intensive plan. Okay, Leanne, does that make sense? Okay. Okay.
I'm sorry, I couldn't find my mute button.
No, that's
But
okay.
yeah, yes, it does.
Okay. So a 504 plan, I'm going to start with what it is not. Okay. It's not a consolation prize when a student does not qualify for an IEP. Okay. The team should not say, well, your child isn't qualifying, or, we can't find any disability under our assessment. So we're going to go ahead and give them a 504 plan. What they can do, though, is when they're doing their assessment for an IEP, they're going to come up with all kinds of data, and this does happen quite a bit. Okay, they're going to come up with significant data and information about your child, and they can say, we don't find the eligibility under the IDEA for an IEP plan. However, we did see ABC and XYZ, and that may qualify for a 504 plan. Okay, so the team can, so that does happen. But if they go through their assessment, they find no disability, they're not just going to give you a 504 plan just to give you something. Okay, but so just be aware of that. The 504 plan is also not for students just because the doctor says they need 504 accommodations. Again, we're going to take that information and include it as input. Okay, and sort of in the same vein as the first bullet, it's a 504 plan is not a plan to appease parents. A 504 plan should be a plan to provide accommodations for a student who has a qualifying disability. Okay, and along those same lines, this is what section 504 does not promise or guarantee. It does not promise results or success. And by that, I mean, it doesn't guarantee high grades. It doesn't guarantee high achievement scores. It also doesn't promise an unfair advantage. So if there's a situation where, sometimes we have requests come for accommodations that a parent might want on their 504 plan, if it reduces the expectations or standards or provides an unfair advantage, then we have the obligation to say, no, we can't provide that accommodation. Okay, and it also doesn't promise placement. And by placement, I mean a specific teacher, classroom, or school site, just because a child has a 504 plan. Now, I will say that our site 504 teams really try to work um, with it, they try to work on when they're enrolling for the next semester or whatever, and their counselors do this as well. They really try to make sure that the students are placed in teachers' classrooms where they feel it's going to be a good fit for their particular needs and their particular disability and the personalities of the teachers. They do try to honor that. But it's important also to note that accommodations are provided because of the disability, so there is equal opportunity to succeed. Level the playing field, but we don't change or alter the game. Okay.
Wendy,
Yeah.
when you say though, not to lower the expectations, does that mean though an accommodation couldn't be something like maybe they do half the spelling list instead of all of the spelling list if that were a needed accommodation? What do you think about that? I just want to make sure I understand.
Yeah, that has happened and it can happen. It just needs to be um in a situation where it's appropriate and doable, as long as
Got it.
it's not compromising the standards.
Got it. So the expectation still is the same that they need, like you
Right.
said, the standard is the same,
The
but
standard has to be met.
right, but there might be some flexibility in
There could
um
be. Yes.
the amount of work. Got it. Okay,
Yeah.
thank you.
So what Section 504 does promise and guarantee is equal access and non-discrimination. Okay. Or in other words, a level playing field. So what we're saying is that when we qualify your child for a Section 504 plan, we're saying that our school and our district is not going to discriminate against your child on the basis of their disability, and that we are going to do everything we can to provide a level playing field for them. Okay. So can 504 students be disciplined? Yes, they can. Students can get PR points, they can get, whatever detention. The 504 does not protect them from being disciplined if there's necessary discipline. So yeah, that comes up every once in a while. Okay, so how does a 504 compare to an IEP, and how is it different? So they both have an assessment or an evaluation. So we usually use the language of assessment for an IEP, evaluation for 504. They both require an annual meeting. They both can provide accommodations on standardized testing. Related services may assist in accessing the regular education. And what do I mean by that? What I mean by that is, so we do not provide typically direct services in a direct related services in a 504 plan. But what we can do is we can consult. So let's say, we have a child who maybe has a physical impairment and we possibly need to consult with the physical therapist. Well, we're not going to put physical therapy on to a 504 plan necessarily, but we can certainly consult. Okay. And that's on an as needed basis when it's appropriate. So how it differs though is that under Section 504, there is no progress reporting. Also, the annual meetings are a little bit different. So I know that, for an IEP, the annual meeting has to occur on or around the same date every year, every school year. That isn't necessarily the case for Section 504. So we can hold the meeting as long as we've held a meeting last year. We're using that 504 plan this school year, and we can hold the annual meeting anytime during the school year. We do try to hold the annual meetings in the fall semester. Not always doable, but we try to hold them as close as we can to the beginning of the fall semester. There are limited discipline protections. Again, very limited. And typically when we look at 504 accommodations, or when we talk about accommodations and modifications, typically we don't put modifications onto a 504 plan because modifications can alter the program. Okay. And so we consider that a 504 student is accessing the general population, the general education program, and we don't modify that. Also, a 504 designation does not appear on a student's transcript. Okay, so accommodations refer to the teaching supports and services that the student may require to successfully demonstrate learning. The accommodations do not change the expectations to the curriculum grade levels. Okay, so some examples might be some of the things that we see a lot. We see strategic seating so that the student is seated in the most appropriate spot in that classroom for that environment for the student. Okay. It might be close to the door. It might be close to the teacher or the source of instruction. It just depends on, because every class environment is different. So it just depends on what works for them, but we call it strategic seating. For some kiddos, we call it, we can have alternative seating. So, and what does that look like? That might mean a child needs to stand every once in a while at their desk or get up and move to the back of the classroom because they need to take a breather or whatever, like frequent breaks to redirect. Might be some extended time on certain subjects. They might need a little extra time to complete a task or whatever. So it's just things like that that don't alter the curriculum or the program. Okay. Modifications, again, we don't typically do modifications in section 504. Those are typically what you see on an IEP. Let's see. Modifications refer to changes that may be made to the curriculum expectations in order to meet the needs of the student. Modifications are made when the expectations are beyond the student's level of ability. Modifications may be minimal or very complex depending on the student performance, and they must be clearly acknowledged in the IEP. Okay, so in 504, we don't do modifications because they could be a substantial alteration of the actual curriculum, and we don't do that. Okay. Accommodations do not fundamentally alter or lower a course standard. So again, some other examples, like a student might need frequent breaks, or they might need a brain break, or whatever, however it looks like on that 504 plan. Again, not reflected on grades or a transcript. Okay. So yeah, I mean, for organization, like we could have a short, like Leanne mentioned a little bit earlier, we could have shortened assignments. We have for some kiddos, we might, especially like if they have ADHD, for example, okay, organization can really be a factor. And so we might sit with them in the meeting and say, okay, we're going to put together a system for this child to be better organized. And so we help them do that. Okay.
Wendy, what about something like, now there are lots of apps and programs that, voice to text, things like that. Are those considered a modification or an accommodation?
Absolutely. Absolutely. It depending on if it's appropriate for them.
Okay.
Okay. Okay. Once again, modifications fundamentally alter or lower a course standard. If they're doing out of level curriculum, that alters the performance standard. Okay. And modifications are reflected on grades and transcripts. Okay. And that is the end of my presentation. So I'm happy to answer any questions.
Wow, thank you. Well, we went quick tonight. So, well, this last question, we'll kind of work our way up. First off, let me thank you. So if anybody wants to log off early and get a little bit of time of your life back, there you go. You're welcome to. That's always a good thing, huh? When presentations end early. But we're so grateful for you answering our questions, Wendy. So if you want to stay on and get some questions answered, you're welcome to do that. If not, remember you're going to get an email from me tomorrow or the day after at the latest with all the links to the handouts and everything you need from tonight's presentation. So, okay, let's start with some of these questions. All right. Well, I think you just really tackled this one a moment ago, but we'll go ahead and check it off our list anyway. Does 504 information go on the student's academic records? I heard you say no.
It does not appear, yeah, it does not appear on a transcript.
Okay. Does being on a 504 restrict a student from receiving his regular high school diploma or future employment
No,
opportunities? No.
no, it does not.
Okay, great. Ooh, this one's a little dicier. What if the parent does not agree with the plan and the accommodations developed by the school? And I know you touched on that a little bit, that they don't have to have that, parent sign off like you would an IEP, right? But what would let's say that a parent doesn't agree, like they just feel like, gosh, this plan needs to be beefed up. I don't think this is enough support. What would you recommend?
So what I would recommend, that's a very good question. And what I would recommend is to bring your concerns to the 504 coordinator on campus and try to work, because the teams will really try to work with parents. So I know that sounds like, uh, when I made that statement, it kind of sounds negative, but
Mhm.
that is not the spirit with which the teams approach working with the parents. So
Sure.
if you have concerns or there's accommodations that you would like to see on the plan or accommodations that are on the plan that you don't think are necessary, have that discussion with the site team because
Mhm.
because they do want to work with you.
Right.
Definitely.
And if you're really feeling frustrated and feeling like, gosh, this is not this is not going as collaborative as I anticipated, you are welcome to reach out to Wendy or myself. Okay. And
Absolutely.
both of our emails will be included. Okay. So, let's go to the top here. Because Kathleen has waited patiently. What about a freshman with oppositional defiance disorder, undiagnosed, but continues having behavioral issues? And I think what she's asking is, like, does that qualify for, or could that qualify for a 504? Do behavior issues qualify for a 504?
It could. It could. So that's worth reaching out to the school site. Um, and whether it qualifies or not, there are a lot of resources for support at the school. So I highly recommend that you reach out to the school
Mhm.
and just inquire. I'm seeing ABC and XYZ, and I do have some concerns. Can we possibly look at an evaluation? And I'm looking for some support. And
Right.
there, again, there's all kinds of resources that can help.
And I agree with that, Wendy. I'm going to piggyback on that because a couple things to keep in mind is, even if it isn't necessarily a 504 situation, there could be those natural supports or, MTSS, multi-tiered systems of
Mhm.
support that are available to any student at the school site. So lots of options. Sometimes though, unfortunately, when it comes to, some types of behaviors, if it's not impacting them during their day at school, right? We hear that a lot, parents will, sometimes sites will say, we're not seeing these behaviors at school. Like they're cruising along just fine. But nonetheless, again, that's that conversation to have with the school site. And in particular, if you feel like you don't get a lot of answers maybe from a teacher, you could always reach out to the school psychologist, have that, conversation. Call me at the Family Resource Center. I'm happy to help you navigate that. Okay, if you
Yeah,
start with an SST, are kiddos still given the same protections of a 504 while being considered for a 504? Ooh, that's a deep one.
that's a good question. So once the 504 process starts, even before the child has qualified, they are protected under Section 504. Once we've started the evaluation process, yes, they are protected.
Okay. If a school denies a 504 plan accommodation, what can parents do?
So I think I touched on this a little bit earlier. If the school does not find a child eligible, then I would have a conversation about, you know, can we look at an SST? Can we continue in the SST
Mhm.
process? And because you want to make sure that your child stays on their radar.
Sure.
And
And I
the
don't
next
know
year,
oh, I'm sorry, I didn't mean to interrupt, Wendy. What I
oh,
was going to
that's
say is,
okay.
I don't think that she was necessarily referring to eligibility. I think she said an accommodation. So I think, and I'm surmising that she was talking about like what you meant if a parent thinks that there needs to be an accommodation or that plan needs to be beefed up, and the school says no, we're not going to add this accommodation. That's not necessary. What can a parent do? I think we pivot back to what you already answered, right? One, there's the parent rights that you'll be given that outline what options are, and two, it's that conversation with the school team. Why is that accommodation not reasonable?
Right.
Okay.
And that's that that can be a difficult conversation sometimes. And I
Mhm.
will say that typically when we have those conversations, we're talking to the school psychologist, we're talking to the teachers, and sometimes parents really, really want an accommodation. And so you've got this back and forth, and hopefully what we hope for is that we can sort of meet in the middle. And sometimes, I will recommend once in a while, like, let's try this, let's just try it. Let's try
Mhm.
it on a trial basis and see. But sometimes a school will say no because they feel that a particular request might be an unfair advantage. So, um, but yeah, I definitely would try to work through the school site. And then, again, if you have concerns, as Leanne mentioned, you can always reach out to me. You can reach out to Leanne, and we can try to help in a situation like that.
Are services ever provided on a 504?
Not typically, very, very rare.
Mhm. Um, oh, this is a good question, Angel. Can you give an example of an organization system type? Um, she said modification, but I think she meant accommodation for ADHD.
Yeah, one of the things that we use quite a bit is colored. I mean, it sounds pretty elementary, but I mean, I see kids in high school use this as well as elementary students. Um, a color coordinated system, right? To differentiate, one color might be this is the work that goes home, and in a different color, this is the work that goes back to school. Um,
Mhm.
Different, like a binder with different colored folders for all the different subjects to make, because kids need to sometimes help with their organization. And um, I often recommend to parents, like, to have a weekly backpack clean out day, right? Where, when
Mhm.
they get home from school, we're going to go through that backpack and pull everything out and make sure, because what happens a lot with kiddos that have ADHD is they're doing their work, but then the work doesn't get to the teacher. Um,
Mhm.
so you know, that happens. So it's just trying to help them learn those skills of keeping on track with their basic organization stuff. And I'm a big fan of the color coding.
Mhm. Great. Here's a kind of specific question that is good. What type of accommodations are there for kids with anxiety?
Um, so there are quite a few there. They can have breaks, usually a pass to a safe space on campus if they need to. They might need to go visit the nurse or to the school psychologist or to their
Mhm.
counselor or they need to have a place to go if they need a moment to catch their breath. Um,
Mhm.
reset themselves, get a drink of water, just sometimes it depends on it depends on the setting, but sometimes it's the teacher the teacher might send them on an errand, right? And
Mhm.
it and
Sure.
just to get
Busy
them out of
work.
the classroom
Uh-huh.
and get them, give them an opportunity to just reset and then come back and then bring it down. So there's
Right.
lots of different things, and anxiety is really tough because it manifests differently in everyone.
Mhm.
So, we just have to we try to do it on a case by case, and what works for that kiddo and what doesn't.
Well, and that's why it's so important that parents do share their input, right? Because you know
Absolutely.
your kiddo best. Two children with anxiety could, present very differently. And what helps them work through that could be very different. Something I've seen too, and like you said, Wendy, it depends on their age, and what grade they're in, and how what type of accommodation they need. But you mentioned like a check-in with an adult. Sometimes, there's that concrete plan though of if Johnny is feeling anxious, he can request, like you said, to go check in with a trusted adult. And then making sure Johnny understands what that is, because it's all good and well to for us adults to put on paper. But like you said, if they're old enough to start coming and really getting that buy-in, I would recommend that as a parent, if that's appropriate,
Absolutely. Yeah,
because
absolutely.
yeah, they really get to then be a part of building that support, and they learn to get that sense of being able to advocate for themselves, because ultimately that's our goal, right? That we want our kiddos to be able to speak up for themselves and be able to figure out what they need to navigate life.
Yeah.
um do 504 accommodations extend to secondary? Great question,
Yes,
Wendy.
that's a very good
Mhm.
question, and yes, they do. Um,
Yes.
there there are some accommodations that are more appropriate in elementary, and so there are some accommodations change a little bit or they evolve. So the plan should evolve as the student evolves and grows.
Mhm.
But yes, they take their 504 plan with them to secondary.
Okay, here's a question. How does a 504 plan come into play with a retention request? So I'm assuming they mean the parent is requesting retention.
So that's a good question. A 504 plan. So with regard to retention, a 504, the fact that the child has a 504 plan, that's going to be considered, but it's, whatever grade level the student is in, the 504 plan is going to apply. So a 504 plan is not going to like make or break the decision of if
Mhm.
the child can or should be retained. either way.
Mhm. So it's not going to sway in favor of or prohibit it, right? It's just
Correct.
going to be taken into consideration.
Correct. Correct.
Okay. And I think you touched on this, but can a student get suspended who has a 504 plan?
Yes, they can. So a student can be suspended with a 504 plan if they are going to be sent over to our SSSA department. In other words, they have a 5-day suspension plus a sendover, which means that their school could change depending on the outcome of that discipline. Then we would have to hold a manifestation determination meeting prior to them going to SSSA. But in terms of just a suspension, yes, they can be suspended with a 504 plan.
Okay. And I just see one last question. It was mentioned that sometimes there is not effective collaboration. What's done if there's not collaboration between a school and a parent does reach out to you or I, Wendy, for assistance?
So we try to navigate that. We try
Mhm,
to bring the parties together and come up with a better collaboration situation for the parent. We do our best to be diplomatic. I would
mhm,
say that, Leanne and I are both really conscientious about that
mhm,
in terms of, we try to help navigate those waters to make it a better situation. And Leanne and I have worked together on a couple of different situations
mhm,
which I think have helped. That's what I would say.
sure. Mhm. Right. I liked the first part of that answer is we're going to help you navigate that, right? So, Lacey has a good question. Can we touch on if either a 504 plan or IEP can help a child be eligible for sports?
Okay, so I can't speak to the IEP part, but I can say for 504, no. The 504 plan does not help a child be eligible for sports. Um, a child may have accommodations that apply
Mhm,
to their participation in sports. That can happen.
mhm,
But the 504 it doesn't take away the GPA requirement. It doesn't alter that. It doesn't alter, whatever the child would need to do in terms of like for making the team. The
mhm,
504 doesn't change or alter the program. If they have to, I don't know. I mean, just as an example, if they have to, in order to make the basketball team, if they have to be able to shoot so many hoops or run so
mhm.
many drills or whatever, the 504 can't take away what they have to do to make the team. And it won't take away the eligibility GPA requirement.
You know what I would say to jump in on that too, though, that if your kiddo is not eligible because of their grades, I would definitely be looking into that because that would be a concern to me as a parent that if my child isn't, I think it's usually a C average, right? So if that would be the red flag to me as a mom, like what's going wrong? Is the plan not supportive enough? Or are there things we need to be working on so that they are meeting eligibility as far as grades? Um, right? Because that would the first thing that went through my mind would be, well, gosh, why would a kiddo be struggling that much? What do we need to do to support them so that they
Sure.
can be eligible?
Right.
Right? Okay.
Mhm.
Well, I hope that helped everyone. Um, let's see. I don't see anything else. I think we did it. High five, everyone. Good job. It's so much information. I feel like you know, it's drinking from a fire hose. But again, please know you do not have to get this memorized in one night. And, you know, we are here to help. We did get one more question. Hold on. Can a 504 address disciplinary action taken due to inability to complete assignments timely? For example, where an elementary school child can't complete the work in the allotted time due to disability and the school disciplines that. Could that be written into the plan?
Okay, say that again. I'm sorry.
Okay,
Yeah, say that one more time.
that's okay. And it's, if you click on Q&A, you can read it too, if that helps. But it says, can a 504 address disciplinary action taken due to inability to complete the assignments timely? For example, you know, a child couldn't get their work done in the allotted time due to their disability, and the school disciplines for that. Could it be written into the plan? Well, what I'm hearing is, you know, that extended time maybe for completing
Right,
assignments.
right. Yeah, if that might be an extended time accommodation.
Mm-hmm. Right. But again, I would, as a parent, I would want to get to the root of, why is it taking them that long? Do they need more support, you know, during the day? Is there something you as a parent can be supporting them with at home to help them get their, you know, I would want to have that conversation. Like,
Right.
why are they struggling so much?
Mhm.
And, you know, and work with the team to get that figured out as well. Okay, I think, let's see, I think we got it. All right. Well, Wendy, I just again want to thank you. I so appreciate it. This is so much information, but you did a great job of really trying to simplify it. And again, everyone, the handouts are in the drive, and you will get an email from me with all that information tomorrow. All right. So thank you, everyone. Have a wonderful evening.
Thank you, Leanne.
All right.
You have a
Bye-bye.
great evening too.
Thank you. Bye-bye.